Hey, Discovery Church, thanks for joining us today for our devotional series. We're talking about who we are in Christ. And today we're talking specifically about being a royal priesthood. So that verse comes from 1 Peter 2, verse 9, but it's interesting what Peter says before and even right after that. So I want to read a little bit of that to you and just comment on it as I read it. So verse 1 says, he's talking to believers. He says, get rid of all evil behavior. Verse 2, he says, crave pure spiritual milk so that you'll grow into a full experience of salvation. Cry out for nourishment now that you've had a taste of the Lord's kindness. So as believers, as people that are in Christ, and he'll say in a minute, a royal priesthood, we're to crave the things of God. We're to crave and hunger for those things. You've probably heard me say before that spiritual hunger is just the opposite of physical hunger. Physically, you get hungry when you don't eat. Well, spiritually, you get more hungry and desire God more the more you read, the more you spend time with Him. You want more of that. And so as we grow and mature in Christ, we hunger for it more. And so he's saying to keep on doing that, keep hungering for the things of God. Verse 5, he says, you are living stones that God is building into his spiritual temple. What's more, you are his holy priests. And then verse 9 is that verse that I mentioned earlier. He says, you are not like the people who have rejected God. He said, you are a chosen people. You are a royal priest, a holy nation, God's very own possession. So here's what we have to understand. God found you. You didn't find God. He found you. God was not lost. We were lost. And God found us. We now belong to him. He paid a price for us, and that price, of course, was his son, Jesus Christ. It goes on to say in verse 9, as a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light. So again, this goes back to who we are in Christ, that we are called to show that light, the light of God, show the love of God to others because we've experienced it, because we have that love. We can now show it to other people. See, other people can't show God's love to anyone because they haven't experienced God's love. You and I have experienced God's love. Now listen to what he says in verse 10. He says, once you had no identity as a people, now you are God's people. It's talking to us as well. Once we had no identity, now our identity is in Christ. He said, once you received no mercy, now you've received God's mercy. Dear friends, listen to this. Dear friends, verse 11, I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners. So he's telling us here, this world is not our home. This is just a temporary residence for us. We are just passing through. So he says, I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners to keep away from worldly desires that wage war against your very soul. So as men and women of Christ, followers of Jesus, royal priests, a holy nation, he calls us, we're to stay away from worldly desires. Now, don't get that confused with not having anything outside of God or the church. So he's talking about don't let those things control you. Don't let those desires so overwhelm you or so overtake you that you begin squeezing God out of the picture, out of your life. We need to, as he said earlier, hunger for those things. And as I said, the closer we get to God, the closer we want to get to God. So let me encourage you today to nurture that time, that hunger with God by spending time with God. A lot of times it starts off as a very disciplined practice that you have to do. You have to determine, I'm going to spend time with God. I'm going to, whether it's prayer or reading the Word or worshiping, whatever it is, I'm going to spend time. I'm going to do this because I need to do this. And you'll find as you do that, you'll hunger for more of that. And you'll continue to grow. You'll continue to mature in Christ as you do that. Hey, remember, you are a royal priesthood. You are a holy nation. You are God's chosen. He chose you and he loves you. Hope this benefited you. Love you. We're continuing to pray for you. And I hope you have a great day and a great weekend. God bless.